Thank you. Neil, it all looks very cosy, you guys all on the settee together. You can't collaborate with these people. You've got to compete with them.
No problem as far as I'm concerned with doing both of those at the same time, but in slightly different areas. I think what we're hearing is, there is an inevitable consistency of approach because we all, in many ways, are trying to achieve the same thing, economic growth, employment growth, and all the things that can come from that. But I think there also has to be a recognition, and it may, let's be realistic about this, it may be easier for the private sector to acknowledge this recognition than perhaps for the public sector. There are already within our different areas, lead activities. Different regions, different areas have their own skills, have their own leading place in the market. And where there is area for clear and sensible support, and let's take perhaps an easy one, HS2, that there must be an argument that HS2 is of benefit to all of our areas.
That's the high-speed rail
Sorry,
project.
that's the high-speed rail project. And getting it to all of our areas as early as possible, if you accept the general argument that it's beneficial, and I assume we all do for these purposes, then why would we not want to work together to ensure it's delivered as soon as possible? Why would we not want to work together with the DOT and the Treasury to point out in very clear terms to them that asking us to wait 20 years is just utterly unacceptable and damaging for the UK economy, just to put a little point for us to discuss perhaps later, but also to get all of our messages over that within our regions and between our regions, we need heavy investment in transport infrastructure. We've heard a lot today already about connectivity and so on. We all have the interest in growing broadband provision. There are lots of areas where we should be working together, where we should cooperate. But I hope that when you're looking at global investment, that what I wouldn't particularly want to see is that if the UK, if the north of England is looking at a project, I wouldn't want to see wasteful competition which facilitated somebody to make a decision to invest, whether in Holland or France or wherever. That's always going to be difficult. But let's be realistic about where we have strengths, not just to clear the path, but let's work together to best advantage.
Good, there's some nods there. I'd like to open it to the floor if there's any questions. Yeah, gentlemen here, we'll get your microphone over now.
Hello, my name's Richard Morris from People Energies. Tesco operates in 15 countries worldwide. It's market leader in 14 of those 15. It has a very clear system of exchanging ideas between those countries, sharing the benefits of local knowledge, making sure that what works in one country, it's tested out in another. Have you got the same kind of formal system for sharing knowledge between LEPs?
What's in your shopping basket then, gents? Can you do a Tesco? It's early days, but I suppose you can share certain things, can you? Paul?
As far as I'm aware, we don't have anything formally like that. But it's interesting that we're gathered here as people from the north. It's not like it's not easy to get together and share these things. For me, just having a few hours with you all today, I've learned so much, and I think I'm also quite impressed of the network we have between the people who work in the LEPs and the government departments. And I think there's quite an active, at least informal flow of information, which is very helpful.
Roger?
Yeah, two things. I think the private sector are very used to collaborating across their own businesses, and they've got the larger companies have got very excellent knowledge transfers and knowledge exchange. The LEPs are very new. I mean, let's be honest, the board members are trying to get to know each other's strengths and weaknesses in their own individual LEPs. So there's a degree of time of settling in, and that's a big concern, really, that people are going to expect the LEPs to move very quickly. So the private sector members have got to get to know each other, get on with the job of work and get to know the public sector. And then they've got to start to communicate as well with the other LEPs. So not yet, but definitely it should be in the future. That would be my answer.
Does that appeal to you, Ed, that these guys are going to do more of that, more collaboration, more talking, more sharing ideas?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think it's absolutely critical if we're going to see good value for money. And sorry to raise the money question, but the Treasury is two-faced, quite deliberately so. It's put at the centre of government to be both the economics ministry and therefore want desperately to put that infrastructure in place as soon as possible, but also to be the finance ministry and to say, hang on, purse strings only stretch so far. So it therefore needs agents of change who are competent, who have cooperated, and who have made choices. Actually, there was a little bit of method to the madness about how we introduced the idea of enterprise zones sort of 6 months, well, in some cases only a few days after LEPs were born, because it was about asking people to start making choices and start prioritising, start looking across their boundaries and within their groups. I think that we'll see a little bit more of that in the future. And then, as I say, we will see for those whose structures are strong and whose geographies are resilient, we will see further devolution and decentralisation away from Whitehall towards the LEP or something which is sort of legally constituted to be able to have that engagement with government.
Thanks. James, you've got vast experience in business, and businesses do build great lines of communication. Can LEPs do that, given it's a sort of a public-private amalgam?
Yes, I think the start point is always going to be the chairman of the LEPs. And I've not met Paul before. I met a number of other LEP chairmen. Neil and Barry Dodd from North Yorkshire and I have already had at least one meeting, and we've had a number of conversations together. So I think that the process has to start at that point to find things of common purpose, common agreement, where it's in our interests to actually put a collective pressure on government or proposals to government. Government ministers come here fairly regularly. They tell us to be radical. They tell us to think out of the box. They tell us to come and talk to them. They want to do deals. So I think some of those deals are not only at LEP level, they are clearly at what I would call English region level. I'm very clear in my mind that the English regions have suffered substantially compared to Scotland, Ireland and Wales, and we're finding that in the marketplace at the moment, where they still have their funding and they still have the ability to decide where that funding is to go. I think that it's pretty new at the moment for a number of the LEPs. I think they need to get their structures in place and their board members in place and their priorities in place. And one of the first things we did in Sheffield was to decide what we weren't going to do, which helped us to decide what we were going to do. And I think that once we've got to that point, then the LEP chairs, I suspect, will start to say, well, it would be a good idea if we cooperated on HS2, or even from our point of view, the link between Sheffield and Manchester needs improving, cooperate on a number of other projects, whether they be infrastructure projects or just the rebalancing of economy, i.e. let's get manufacturing moving. What incentives do we need to get manufacturing? Because we all do manufacturing in the north of various kinds, but the incentives, perhaps, as I heard this morning, some of those incentives aren't there yet, and we need to perhaps have more of a collective voice to Edward and others to say, this is our view, please listen to us. And I think that those are the sort of areas, clearly around Europe, where we've got artificial regional boundaries at the moment. We're going to cooperate within Yorkshire, and the North East will have to cooperate together, and in the Northwest they will have to cooperate together. So there are already a number of things that I think are there for us to cooperate on. I think the lead needs to be taken by the chairman, and then it needs to be the officers actually delivering some of those projects in whatever form they need to be.
Great. Okay.
David, just as a point of information, next week the British Chambers of Commerce effectively launch a LEP, what I'll call an information network. They've been asked by government to do so, and that's intended to be the basis of an information exchange for the LEPs.
Right. So something a bit more formal.
Yeah. Well, there's a conference where the LEP chairmen are meeting for the first time. I mean, there has been a summit, but that was really a political affair with the Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. This is about the LEP chairman having much more of a clear say.
Great. So real progress there. That's good.